mysterious deaths in the Bible. Number 1. Lot's wife. There is a woman that Jesus referenced in Luke. Remember Lot's wife. Luke chapter 17, verse 32. Her death was unlike any other in the Bible. Lot's wife is an unnamed woman mentioned only a few times in the Bible. She is a woman who died prematurely as a result of her disobedience to the Lord's word. The truth is that we know more about Lot's wife's death story than anything else about her. In Genesis 13, Abram, Sarai, and Lot depart Egypt with their riches. The majority of the possessions belonged to Abram, who was extremely rich. They moved south and constructed an altar between Bethel and Hai. However, they quickly realized that the land was not suitable for them, because Lot also had flocks, herds, and tenants. Lot chooses Sodom. Conflict developed between Abram's and Lot's shepherds. Abram did not want any hard feelings, so he made a proposal to Lot. Genesis chapter 13, verses 7 to 12. And there was strife and quarreling between the herdsmen of Abram's cattle and the herdsmen of Lot's cattle. Now the Canaanite and the Perizzite were living in the land at the same time, making grazing of the livestock difficult. So Abram said to Lot, "Please, let there be no strife and disagreement between you and me, nor between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, because we are relatives. Is not the entire land before you? Please, separate yourself from me. If you take the left, then I will go to the right, or if you choose the right, then I will go to the left." So Lot looked and saw that the valley of the Jordan was well watered everywhere. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. It was all like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as you go to Zoar at the south end of the Dead Sea. Then Lot chose for himself all the valley of the Jordan, and he traveled east. So they separated from each other. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, and Lot settled in the cities of the valley, and camped as far as Sodom and lived there. Lot researched the country and decided on the Jordan plain because it was close to water. Lot pitched his tent toward Sodom, while Abram dwelt in Canaan. Lot traveled with his wife on this journey. Indeed, he moves out of or near the border of the land of promise, to the plain cities whose inhabitants were notorious sinners. Thus, what he saw as a great step forward became his ruin, because these cities were doomed to destruction. Despite the fact that Abraham and Sarah were growing older, the Lord warned him of the escalating evil and impending wrath of Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot was sitting at the entrance to Sodom when two angels approached and offered them a place to stay for the night. They declined because they did not want to spend the night on the street. They eventually agreed and followed Lot, who provided them with food. That night, however, all the men of Sodom heard about the angels and surrounded Lot's house. "Where are the men who came to you tonight?" The angels drew Lot inside and locked the door, then struck the evil ones outside with blindness, to the point where they couldn't find the house's door. The angels told Lot to gather his family and leave Sodom as soon as possible. Lot cautioned his sons-in-law, but they insulted him and disregarded his advice. As daylight came, the angels reminded Lot that judgment was looming and that he ought to remove his wife and daughters from the city. "Flee for your lives," one of the angels exclaimed as they fled the city. "Do not look back or halt anywhere in the plain. Get to the mountains, or you'll be washed away." Then the Lord showered brimstone and fire from heaven on Sodom and Gomorrah, and overthrew those towns and all the plain, and all the inhabitants of the cities and all that grew on the ground. As the cities were being demolished. Genesis chapter 19, verse 26. But Lot's wife looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. Lot and his 2 daughters escaped to Zoar, a city in the adjacent mountains. According to Bible interpretations, Lot's wife was turned into a pillar of salt for looking back, for breaking the instruction not to look back. Her actions indicate that she sympathized with the people of Sodom, and her failure to evade God's wrath serves as a stark warning to others. She was exceedingly blessed to have God's angels in her home. They even took her by the hand and led her out of Sodom. But what good did it all do her in the end? All of God's grace was wasted on her. There are several key takeaways here. Number 1, it is possible to be lost forever. Even though you are religious and have every opportunity to do right, you can come from a pleasing family, have many spiritual advantages, and still be lost. Number 2, you can leave the world and begin on the correct path, but you will be eternally lost if you turn back. You are in charge of your own beliefs. But why did God care if she glanced over her shoulder at Sodom? Number 1, looking back was an indication of doubt. She had to confess to God the penalty and fate of Sodom. He had spoken, and He would carry out His promise. We may declare that we believe God, yet when the test comes, we waver and look back. God invites us to put our trust in Him and turn our attention to spiritual matters. Also, looking back was non-compliance because God had clearly instructed not to look back. To look back may have revealed her true attachment to Sodom. Was she displaying a love for what she was leaving behind? Her body was leaving, but her heart was still in Sodom. Do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Whoever therefore wants to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. James chapter 4, verse 4. Do we want to be friends with the rest of the world? This does not imply giving up everything in the world. This world represents everything that is opposed to God, the wickedness that was once a part of your life. Number 2, Moses, the man that God buried. God has chosen to withhold such information about the events preceding Moses' death from us. The mere mention of the name Moses arouses different images in the minds of various folks. In the Bible, Moses' death is shrouded in mystery. He died at the age of 120, but his eyes were not weak, nor his strength gone. Moses was still in his prime when he was called home, despite his age. Moses was barred from entering the Promised Land because of his disobedience at the waters of Meribah Kadesh. He led the Israelites to the very edge of Canaan and was given a glimpse of the land, but he was not permitted to enter it. Mount Pisgah has a summit elevation of 4,500 feet, and that's nearly a mile. There aren't many 120-year-old men who can climb a mountain nearly a mile high and live to tell the tale. Moses could take each step on the slope in stride with lightened shoulders. He was well aware that he was about to take his final breath at any moment. When it comes to the subject of death, Moses teaches us that a believer has no reason to be afraid or to rush out into the streets in a panicked state. Death is an inescapable part of reality for each and every one of us. Before we are truly prepared to live, we must first be prepared to pass away. Therefore, when we are ready to pass away, let us not delay and immediately do it. As Moses took in this final visual feast of the Promised Land, a piece of real estate that he would never step foot upon, this is what he was looking forward to the most. And that was it. God wanted him home. Then the Lord said to him, "This is the land which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not go over there." So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. Moses gave up the spirit. Whether we are heroes or not, we will all reach the point in our lives when we must abandon the body and pass on to another realm. Two different messages spring from this. The aloneness of death. Not its loneliness, but its aloneness. There's a difference. Loneliness suggests an empty longing, reaching in vain for someone else. Aloneness means nobody else goes along. That is what I see here. It's a solo flight. You never take a companion along when you travel through death. You go all alone. On the other hand, Moses is all by himself atop Mount Pisgah. Joshua was not allowed to accompany them in any way, and Aaron had long since disappeared. On the rocky trek to the peak, where there was no discernible trail, there was just one solitary figure to be seen. The next thing that springs up is the security of death. Moses died according to the word of the Lord. The man's life came to an end precisely how God had planned it out all along. Moses passed away by himself, but in peace. The account of his passing is contained within the final 6 verses of the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 34. Death has a way of putting things in proper perspective, doesn't it? After a death comes a burial. And so it was in the case of Moses. But verse 6 contains one of the most remarkable statements about the whole remarkable career of Moses. Deuteronomy chapter 34, verse 6. "And he buried him in the valley in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor. But no man knows where his burial place is to this day." Moses is the only person in the Bible whom God personally buried. Did you realize that? The Lord then hid the tomb. What made him do that? Because that grave would have been turned into a shrine. They'd still be beating a path up Nebo today, erecting shrines, selling popcorn and peanuts, offering various rides, and maybe even running a tram up there with big banners proclaiming Moses' burial place. So it was concealed. This was so crucial to the Lord that it even sparked an angelic confrontation. Jude verse 9 contains one of the stranger accounts in the Bible concerning this event. Jude writes, "But Michael the archangel, when he disputed with the devil and argued about the body of Moses, did not dare pronounce against him an abusive judgment, but said, 'The Lord rebuke you.'" The end of the story. All things have their proper wrap-up, as does the story of Moses. Since that time, there has not been another prophet who has arisen in Israel who is comparable to Moses, whom the Lord personally knew. This is due to all of the miracles and signs that the Lord commanded Moses to perform in the land of Egypt against Pharaoh, all of his servants, and the entirety of Pharaoh's land, as well as due to all of the great terror and mighty power that Moses displayed in front of all of Israel. Famous French historian and philologist Joseph Renan once said of Moses, "He is a colossus among figures of humanity." Moses was clearly one of a kind, but at the end of the day, he was just a man serving God. Nonetheless, we can derive a great deal of personal gain from learning about his life and passing. Number 3. Jesus. The final moments of Jesus' life are recorded in Mark chapter 15, verses 33 to 39. His journey to the cross has been fraught with agony. He has been neglected, mocked, degraded, and humiliated, in addition to being subjected to torture. Jesus takes his final breath at this moment as he hangs on the cross. Mark chapter 15, verse 33. At noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. This would be 12 o'clock in the afternoon, and the darkness would last until the 9th hour, or 3 o'clock. This otherworldly darkness arrived when the sun was shining highest. Because the moon was now full, it couldn't have been created by an eclipse, because the moon can't intervene between the earth and the sun when it's full. This darkness was undoubtedly brought about by God's prompt intervention. Mark chapter 15, verse 34. At the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which is translated, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. St. Mark here uses the Aramaic form. St. Matthew refers to the original Hebrew. This might be rendered, "Why didst thou forsake me?" Mark chapter 15, verse 35. And when some of the bystanders heard him, they began saying, "Look, he is calling for Elijah." Those who stayed around the cross, despite the mysterious darkness, are mentioned in verse 35. The darkness would certainly add to the dreadfulness of the situation. It was out of that darkness that the voice of Jesus was heard, and inasmuch as Elias or Elijah was believed to hold some relation to the Messiah, it was natural for some of those who stood by to understand the words to mean that our Lord was actually calling for Elias. Mark chapter 15, verse 36. And one ran and filled a sponge full of vinegar, and put it on a reed, and gave him to drink, saying, "Let alone, let us see whether Elias will come to take him down." And Jesus cried with a loud voice, and gave up the ghost. And the veil of the temple was rent in twain from the top to the bottom. Before entering the holy place, there was the first veil, and then there was a second veil before entering the Holy of Holies. The holy place would correspond to what we refer to as the nave of the church, which is a part of the church in which the priests were usually present. The Holy of Holies would be equivalent to our chancel choir, which is the most sacred area of the structure. This was always kept closed, and the only person who was permitted to enter it was the high priest, and even then, only on the day of expiation, which occurred once a year. The veil that was placed in front of the Holy of Holies was the one that was torn during the crucifixion of our Lord. It was the responsibility of the officiating priest, on the evening of the day of preparation, at the hour of evening prayer, which would correspond to the time of our Lord's death, to enter into the holy place, where he would of course be between the two curtains or veils, the outer veil and the inner veil. It would then be his responsibility to roll back the outer veil, exposing the sacred space to the people in the outer court. Then and there, to their amazement, they would witness the inner veil ripped apart from top to bottom. This tearing of the veil now meant, first, dispensation, with its rites and ceremonies, was now uncovered by Christ, and that thenceforth the middle wall of partition was broken down, so that now not the Jews only, but the Gentiles also might draw nigh by the blood of Christ. But second, it also implied that the way to heaven was laid open by our Lord's death. When thou hadst overcome the sharpness of death, thou didst open the kingdom of heaven to all believers. The veil implied that heaven was closed to all, until Christ by his death rent this veil in twain and laid open the way. Mark chapter 15, verse 39. And when the centurion, who was standing right in front of him, saw that he died in this way, he said, "Truly, this man was the Son of God." He must have been standing close to the cross, and there was something in the dying sufferer's entire demeanor that was so unlike anything he had ever seen before, that it elicited the spontaneous cry, "Truly, this man was the Son of God." In just a few verses, Mark packs a lot of punch. There's a lot to say about the strange events that occur. Jesus had an effect on those who were close to him. The thief on the cross had a distinct reaction to him, and now the soldier who was watching over Jesus has to comment that he is the Son of God. At the beginning of his ministry, Jesus had kept his identity a secret from everyone, but now it was completely obvious to everyone. This man truly was the Son of God. What a declaration for a Roman officer to make! If any of the religious leaders overheard him, they would have lost their minds. They just spent the previous day persuading Rome to execute Jesus, precisely because he was blaspheming about being God's Son. You need to realize that Jesus died for you. Do not reject him. Once you've known him, once you've heard the gospel and rejected it, you can never be the same. It says that when the rich young ruler rejected Christ, he turned away grieved, emotionally disturbed. Because when you reject the claims of Christ, that's a very serious thing. It will be an hour of decision for many of you who will receive him today.